The wind had teeth. It scraped across the basin in hard, white sheets, hissing over crusted drifts and the broken shale berm that barely qualified as cover. The world was all glare and jagged shadow, bright enough to make your eyes water, cold enough to make your thoughts feel slow. The basin itself was a shallow bowl, scoured clean in places, piled deep in others, the kind of terrain that looked open and simple until you were trapped in it and every angle belonged to someone else. Rounds snapped overhead like angry insects. The snow in front of the berm jumped in tight little bursts as bullets stitched a line across it, searching for flesh. The shale they'd crawled behind was fractured and thin, chunks the size of dinner plates stacked like bad masonry. It wasn't a wall. It was a suggestion. Count. The team lead rasped, voice low, as if the enemy could hear syllables through the wind. 5 men. Now 4.5. The medic's shoulder pressed into the leads as he worked, hunched against the berm, trying to become smaller than a human could be. His gloves were slick and stiff at the same time, blood and melting snow and the cold turning everything into something that didn't want to bend. The wounded man lay on his side, jaw clenched, eyes unfocused, the lower half of his leg wrapped in a tourniquet that had already darkened where it bit into fabric. "Chief," the comms tech whispered, eyes wide behind snow fog lenses. "Radio's dead." Again, the chief muttered, like he could shame the universe into cooperation. He grabbed his handset, thumbed the switch, cycled frequencies the way you did when you refused to accept reality. Static answered him, not the soft, fading static of distance or terrain. This was thick, deliberate, white noise laid over the channel like a blanket thrown on a fire. The sat link should have been their lifeline. A burst, a handshake, a few seconds of clean connection to get an extraction time, to call in anything heavier than their own rifles. But the little display blinked and never locked. The device felt like dead weight now, just another piece of gear to carry while people try to kill them. "Mountains don't eat signals like this," the comms tech hissed. "Someone's doing it." The chief didn't answer, because answering meant admitting it out loud. From the ridgeline, a crew-served gun hammered in measured bursts. 3, 3, pause, 2, like an engine that never overheated. The sound wasn't just noise. It was control. The burst pinned them, kept heads down, kept options closed. And then, between the bursts, single shots cracked like a judge's gavel. Precise, punishing. Anyone who rose even a few inches too high got a round slapped into the shale inches from his cheek, or into the snow where his elbow had been a moment earlier. They were being worked. The heavy gunner tried to answer back, careful at first, then more desperate. He leaned out just enough to fire a short string toward a shadowed notch in the ridge. His barrel smoked faintly in the cold, steam rising in a thin line that felt like a beacon. He flinched and tucked back in, breathing hard. "Mo," the chief asked. "Not enough for this," the gunner said, voice flat with the kind of fear that had already moved past panic and settled into math. The medic's hands kept moving. He didn't look up. He didn't have the luxury. "Where's Mason?" someone asked, breacher, voice tight. Silence, then a slow realization spreading like ink through water. Their missing man was somewhere out there in the drift, swallowed by glare and wind. A dark smear behind a rise. A shape that might be a rock. Nothing moved. "Don't," the chief warned, because he saw the breacher's shoulders tense. "I'm not leaving him," the breacher whispered. "You go, you die," the chief said. "We all die. Smoke would have helped. At least that's what the playbook said." The breacher popped a canister anyway, thumbed it, and tossed it into the open. The wind tore it apart like it was tissue, gray curled, and then vanished, ripped into a ribbon that stretched and thinned until it was nothing but a faint stain on white air. "You've got to be kidding me," the breacher breathed. Above, faint and ugly, a buzzing sound drifted in and out of hearing. Not a bee, not a bird. A small machine cutting circles somewhere high and wide. The comms tech's eyes tracked the sky, squinting. Drone. A cold weight settled in the chief's stomach. A drone meant they weren't just being shot at. They were being observed, corrected, herded. Every time they shifted, every time someone tried to crawl, the crew-served gun adjusted like it had a hand on their collar. The chief tried one last comm switch, the kind you save for when you're out of good ideas. Different channel, different encryption, a prayer to whatever gods lived in dead batteries and satellite paths. Static. Again. Solid as a wall. He pressed his forehead to the shale, eyes squeezed shut for a half-second that felt like an hour. The wind shoved at his helmet. The basin roared with gunfire. "We're gonna die," he said, not loud enough for the enemy, but loud enough for the men behind the berm to hear and understand the shape of their situation. Then the enemy began to close the lid. The burst shifted. Fire walked inward, bracket by bracket, carving away their margin. The crew-serve gun stopped pinning and started steering. The single shots came faster now, as if the shooters on the ridge sensed the finish line. The medic's fingers paused for the first time, just a flicker. He looked up, eyes hard. "I can't move him like this. We're out of time," the heavy gunner said. The buzzing drone seemed closer. And then, silence sliced through the chaos. Not a complete silence. The wind still hissed. The team still breathed. But the crew-serve gun stopped mid-burst like a throat cut off from air. 3 rounds into a string, and then nothing. The chief lifted his head, disbelieving. He didn't move much, just enough to risk seeing. Up on the ridge, far enough that faces were impossible, a figure behind the gun sagged sideways and disappeared from view as if pulled down by invisible hands. A beat later, another shot, not the loud crack of a rifle echoing through cold air. This one sounded swallowed, like the snow itself had eaten it. And then a man near a cluster of rocks, a radio operator, the one who'd been shifting and signaling, slumped backward, his arm dropping limp. The SEALs froze. Their brains tried to fit this into a pattern they understood. Friendly overwatch wasn't scheduled. There was no second element. No call had gone out. No one could have gotten up there without them knowing. And yet someone had just reached into the fight and plucked out 2 enemy anchors like they were loose threads. The medic's breath made a tight cloud. Ooh, another swallowed shot. A 3rd enemy body folded, quick, efficient, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The drone buzz faltered, its orbit wobbling. The chief's eyes swept, searching for the impossible. He saw only the ridge, the snow, the stunted rock, the bare patches where the wind had stripped things raw. And then he saw it. Downslope from the ridge, not high where a sniper should be, not on a proud perch with a panoramic view, just a shallow strip where snow thinned and something pale and flattened poked through. Dead grass, wind-beaten, bent low like it had spent its life trying not to be noticed. The grass didn't move, but the chief had the strangest sensation that it was holding its breath. Hours earlier, before the snow basin had become a trap, the world had been smaller, warmer, in a way a stove and a plywood hut could make a frozen morning feel almost normal. The staging hut sat at the edge of the valley, half buried, its walls sweating ice where heat met cold. Inside, maps were taped to plywood. A cheap lamp hummed. Steam rose from mugs and bodies, and wet gear hung on nails like skins. The chief stood over the map with a finger planted on a ridgeline. In Verify Photo, pull the module out. No hero stuff. Remote sensor sight, the comms tech said, scrolling on a tablet, gloved finger awkward. It's been throwing weird traffic. Could be hijacked. Could be dead. Could be somebody spoofing. Or somebody using it, the heavy gunner said. The breacher chewed on a protein bar like it was a personal insult. Who's somebody today? Doesn't matter, the chief said. We treat it like it matters. They were a compact element. Chief in front, comms tech, heavy gunner, medic breacher. Lean on purpose. Speed overweight. You didn't bring a siege package to a reconnaissance problem. And then there was the attachment. She sat off to the side, rifle case at her feet, posture loose but attentive, like she'd learned long ago that tension burned energy and energy was life. She looked older than she seemed when you caught the angles of her face in the lamplight, lines that didn't come from age so much as from weather and decisions. She spoke only when she had something that needed saying. Most of the time, she just listened. The breacher glanced at her and smirked. So you're Overwatch? She nodded once. Ghost girl, he muttered to the heavy gunner. Loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to be called out. Heard she takes grass naps. The heavy gunner snorted. In snow country? What grass? The attachment didn't react. If she heard, she didn't care. Or she cared and had trained herself out of showing it. She opened her case, checked her rifle with the calm of someone tightening shoelaces. She inspected the optic, the mount, the caps. She touched the battery compartment and frowned, then tucked a spare inside her jacket where warmth would keep it alive. The chief went through the plan again. He tapped the ridgeline marked in pencil. Overwatch there. Team approaches from the side ridge. Avoids the valley funnel. The attachment leaned forward, studied the map in silence, then reached out with a pencil and drew a line somewhere else. Lower. Uglier. A route that crawled through scrub and shallow depressions rather than climbing to the obvious high perch. The heavy gunner raised an eyebrow. That's not a perch. That's nothing. It's not nothing, she said, voice quiet, almost soft. The chief looked at her. Explain. She didn't launch into a lecture. She didn't drown them in jargon. She just pointed. High ridge silhouettes you. In snow glare, anyone looking downslope sees movement first. Low pockets break outline. Wind strips snow there, dead grass. It hides shape. The comms tech cleared his throat. There are weird dead zones out here. Last patrol said their radios went spotty. Mountains eat signals, the breacher said, shrugging. The attachment didn't shrug. Her eyes stayed on the map like it was a living thing. Some dead zones are made. The chief watched her for a beat longer than necessary. You think jamming? Maybe, she said. Maybe not. But if it happens at the worst moment. The medic rubbed his hands together, warmth seeking. Enemy got drones. A pause. The comms tech hesitated. Maybe. There's chatter. Cheap ones, commercial. Nothing fancy. The attachment's gaze lifted. Cheap still sees. Outside, the valley was brightening into day, the sun catching the snow and turning it into a field of knives. The plan depended on speed. Daylight gave you speed. Daylight also gave you visibility, sometimes too much. Right before they stepped out, a runner from the flight crew shoved his head into the hut. Drop changed. Weather corridor. You're going in the valley approach. The chief's jaw tightened. That puts us in the funnel. Or you don't go at all, the runner said. Bird can't take the side ridge. The attachment said one line, calm, not dramatic, like she was commenting on the temperature. Valleys become funnels. It landed wrong, like superstition, like someone trying to sound wise. The chief nodded anyway. We move fast. Keep spacing. Eyes up. They stepped into the cold, and the world swallowed their footprints almost immediately. Wind erased evidence. Wind hid intentions. They moved in daylight because there wasn't time to wait for dusk. Their breath fogged in front of them. Snow squeaked under boots. Every sound felt loud, even when it wasn't. The attachment peeled off to her overwatch route early, sliding down into scrub where the snow thinned. The breacher looked back at her once, smirk fading. Try not to fall asleep in the grass. She didn't answer. She just disappeared into the glare. The team reached the sensor site faster than expected. The mast stood on a small ridge shoulder, half rimed with ice, guy wires singing softly in the wind. It looked tired, abandoned, the kind of thing you wanted to believe no one cared about. But as they got close, the comms tech slowed, eyes narrowing. Tool marks, he said. Fresh, straight, clean. Someone had been there recently. He popped the access panel, fingers clumsy in gloves. Inside, the module should have matched their inventory. It didn't. This one was newer, different casing. Swapped, he breathed. The chief's stomach sank. Take it. The comms tech reached in, pulled the module free. The first shot cracked and snapped a puff of snow off the mast inches from the chief's shoulder. He dropped instinctively, body hitting snow hard enough to sting through layers. Contact, the heavy gunner shouted, already swinging his weapon toward the ridge. Another shot came, tighter, closer. The breacher's cheek felt heat as a round passed, so close it made the air slap him. Then the valley woke up. Fire opened from two ridge lines, intersecting like scissor blades. The team was suddenly in the low bowl, the basin they tried to avoid with sparse cover, rocks that didn't cover enough, snow that covered nothing. The comms tech jammed his handset against his ear. Radio. Static. Solid. Immediate, like someone had flipped a switch. The sat link blinked and failed to lock. Backup, the chief barked. The comms tech switched to handheld. The handheld answered with hiss. Too perfect, the comms tech said, voice rising. That's a jammer. The heavy gunner fired short bursts toward the ridge, trying to buy them space, but the enemy had geometry. They shot from high ground with lanes that overlapped. Every time the SEALs tried to shift, rounds chewed into the snow at their elbows, walked them back into the center of the bowl. A buzzing drifted in, faint at first, then more insistent. The drone appeared as a black speck against white sky, circling wide, patient. It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. It saw enough. Drone spotting, the breacher shouted. The enemy fire tightened. The crew-serve gun found a rhythm and held it, like it had practiced. A SEAL sprinted for a rock shelf and took a round in the leg mid-stride. He went down hard, sliding, leaving a smear of red that looked obscene against snow. The medic moved without thinking. He dragged the wounded man behind the shelf, pressed his body into him like a shield, hands already working. Tourniquet. Pressure. Breath. Function. The heavy gunner fired again, more this time trying to suppress. His barrel steamed in the cold, a thin line rising like a confession. Wind kicked up, snow skittering low across the ground, turning the world into shifting white static. It reduced contrast, made ridge shadows blur, made it harder to see where the shots were coming from. It didn't reduce the shots. The chief tossed smoke again because you did what you could. The wind shredded it. The drone tracked through gaps. They tried a flank crawl toward a shallow gully, an obvious route, the only route with even a hint of defilade. Fire walked them back with disciplined patience. Someone on the ridge had anticipated the option, had planned for it, had built the trap like a net. Time pressure landed like a blow. Their extraction window wasn't infinite. A helicopter couldn't loiter in a valley under fire. And even if it could, they couldn't talk to it, couldn't coordinate, couldn't mark. The enemy fire changed. It paused in patterns, suppressive bursts followed by breathing gaps that felt almost kind, until you realized what it was. The gaps weren't mercy. They were invitations. They wanted the SEALs to move. Why'd they stop? The breacher whispered. The comms tech's eyes were wide, mind racing. They're not trying to kill us all at once. They're shaping. They want us alive. Why? The heavy gunner demanded. The comms tech clutched the stolen module to his chest like it was suddenly radioactive. Because of this, or because of one of us. The chief looked out at the bowl, at the way fire bracketed their cover, at how the drone held its orbit like a shepherd dog. They're closing the lid, he said. Then the moment returned, the one that didn't fit the plan. A shot from nowhere. A crew-serve gun stopping mid-burst like a heart that forgot how to beat. A radio operator slumping. The SEALs froze because their brains needed the pause to recalibrate reality. The attachment lay belly down in dead grass, poking through snow, her cheek against stock, breath slow enough to make time feel thicker. The grass was pale, wind-flattened, almost the same color as the crust around it. In the glare lines, where the sun reflected off snow hard enough to blind, she was a smudge. A mistake. Nothing worth noticing. She heard the firefight not as sound, but as information. The crew-serve gun's cadence told her where it was anchored. The single shots told her there was a marksman with discipline. The pauses told her someone was controlling the tempo, not just reacting. She studied the basin and saw the geometry. 2 ridges, yes, but also a hidden mid-slope position, tucked into a shelf that controlled the gully, the obvious escape route. Someone had built this like a trap, not a skirmish. Someone had rehearsed it. Her optic battery was low, cold drain. The little indicator that should have been green was flirting with red. She kept illumination off. She trusted glass and naked eye, trusted what she could confirm without electronics. Above, the drone orbited in predictable arcs. Cheap machines conserve battery. They didn't improvise unless pushed. She watched its pattern, timed the blind wedge beneath it, moved only when it couldn't see. She crawled through the dead grass strip where wind had stripped snow thin. The grass broke up her outline better than pure white. It gave texture. It gave lie. She used the sun angle. Anyone on the ridge looking downslope fought glare. If she stayed where the light was harshest, she became a darker shadow inside brightness. Human eyes hated that. Human brains filtered it out. She avoided the hero ridge entirely. High perches were for people who wanted to feel powerful. High perches got you silhouetted. She moved laterally across a depression where snow drifted deep enough to swallow knees. It was slow, exhausting. Every inch was work, but it kept her below ridge sight lines. Along the way, she saw proof of preparation. A shallow dug shelf carved into hard snow, scuffed with boots, with a battery pack imprint where something heavy had sat. Near it, trampled snow showed multiple positions rotated through. They'd been here. They'd planned. They'd rehearsed. A dropped strip of colored ribbon fluttered weakly from a rock. A marker. Enemy sign. A route guide for climbers moving downslope later, closing the net. She reached a cramped, ugly firing pocket near a rock seam where grass met ice. No panoramic view. No cinematic overlook. Just one critical slice of slope where she could see what mattered. She built a stable rest with her pack and a gloved fist, elbows dug into cold. She controlled breathing. The wind pushed at her hood. The world was noise, and she made it quiet inside herself. She selected her priorities, not the loud guns, not the men firing wildly, the brains and eyes, the things that multiplied force, the ones that made the trap a trap. A jammer, a spotter, a drone handler, an RPG team, a commander. She waded through a full heartbeat of chaos, refusing the easy shot at a random rifleman. Easy shots were candy. Candy made you slow. Candy made you dead. Then the jammer position revealed itself. Not because she saw an antenna waving like a flag, but because she saw discipline in the enemy's comms. She watched a man shift behind a snow lip, adjust something, glance down at a device, speak into a handset. He wasn't shooting. He was controlling the air. She exhaled slowly, let the reticle settle, squeezed. The shot didn't echo the way the team below expected, not because the rifle was magic, but because she timed it with a gust and fired from a pocket where rock and snow swallowed sound. Wind carried what remained away. The snowfield didn't return an echo if you didn't give it one. On the ridge, the jammer's antenna mast jerked, sparks spitting briefly as the device died. The man collapsed backward, surprise frozen on him even from this distance. Down in the basin, the comms tech's handset crackled. Not clear, not stable, but different, static shifting pitch like a choking hand loosening. "Chief," the comms tech said, voice hoarse. I got fragments." The chief's head snapped up, hope and terror mixing. The attachment didn't watch them. She stayed on her ladder. The drone handler was next. She'd identified him by behavior. He watched the drone's orbit, glanced between sky and a tablet, gestured to shooters. He wasn't firing. He was feeding corrections. He was the drone's brain. She waited until he stepped into the harsh glare edge, where the sun would make him squint. Then she squeezed again. Binoculars dropped from his hands. His body folded, clean and final. The drone's orbit widened, became sloppy, a drunk circle without guidance. It still buzzed, still existed, but now it wasn't a shepherd. It was a lost animal. The enemy reacted because they weren't fools. Fire surged in a frantic wave, less disciplined. Someone shouted on the ridge, arms flailing. A rifleman leaned too far and got pulled down by recoil fear. The attachment used the chaos. She took the RPG man as he shifted, tube shouldering, eyes seeking angle. He never fired. He collapsed behind the launcher, and the launcher rolled, useless. She took the crew-served gun's feeder as he leaned in to clear a snag. The belt went slack. The gun stuttered and died. Down below, a pocket of quiet opened. Not peace. A gap. The chief recognized it like a door cracking open. "Move the wounded now," he snapped. The heavy gunner pivoted, fired suppressive bursts toward the ridge to keep heads down. The breacher and medic hauled the wounded man toward the shallow gully, dragging him through snow that grabbed like hands. The comms tech crawled behind them, clutching the module, trying to keep his handset high enough to catch any thread of signal. But the enemy adapted. The trap builders didn't panic. They shifted. They stopped spraying and started hunting. Two men peeled off the ridge and moved downslope along the marked route. The climbers, moving low, using rocks and drift lines, angling toward the grass seam. They weren't trying to win the basin now. They were trying to flush the unseen shooter who just cut their anchors. A second drone appeared lower, closer, smaller, meaner in its proximity. It dipped and hovered, looking for muzzle flash, looking for movement in grass. The attachment felt the pressure tighten. Her optic began to fog at the edges where warm breath met cold glass. She wiped it with a glove already wet and freezing, smearing a thin film that she had to blink through. She changed rhythm. Shoot, then slide. Inches at a time, she shifted laterally, using grass tufts as micro-cover. She became a moving problem. Every time the drone dipped toward where it thought she wasn't there anymore. The first climber got close enough that she could see his breath cloud. He moved careful, smart, not a reckless recruit. He paused, listened, scanned. She let him, because sometimes you didn't win by shooting first. Sometimes you won by letting the enemy commit to a mistake. He stepped into a narrow chute between rock and drift, where his options narrowed. She waited until his weight settled, until retreat would be awkward, until his attention was forward. Then she squeezed. He dropped in the chute, and his body became an obstacle, blocking the second climber's view, disrupting their spacing, turning their hunt into confusion. The second climber froze, indecisive, and indecision was a gift. But the enemy commander wasn't done adapting. The ridge fired bracketing shots toward the grass seam. Not precise now, but saturating. Snow erupted in dirty plumes as launched grenades or light mortars popped, throwing powder and grit. Visibility collapsed in bursts. The world became white smoke and black flecks. The attachment held still because movement was what the drone wanted. She let the snow settle around her, let coat her sleeves, let make her look like part of the drift. Through the chaos, she searched for the commander. Not the loudest voice, not the man firing the biggest gun. The commander was the one people leaned toward, the one whose signal pauses, the one whose head turned before others moved. She saw him at last, a figure behind a rock cluster, gesturing with a gloved hand, calm even now, making the fight reform around him. He stepped forward into the glare edge for half a second to see the basin better. Half a second was enough. Her exhale was slow. Her squeeze was clean. The turning point shot landed, and the commander folded like a tent pole snapped. Something in the enemy broke. Not courage, but cohesion. Fire became reactive, not planned. Bursts came uneven. Shooters popped up alone, without coverage. Lanes opened in jagged gaps. In the basin, the chief felt it. He didn't know why it happened, but he knew what it meant. Go, he shouted. They dragged the wounded man into the gully they couldn't reach earlier, using smoke not as concealment now, but as distraction, throwing it wide, letting wind shred it as a false flag while they crawled the other way. The comms tech's handset crackled again, a thin thread of clarity cutting through static. Mark bent 2 mics. The chief grabbed the mic, voice sharp. We're moving. Need pickup at the bend. North side cannot loiter. Copy. A pause. Then a voice, broken but real. Copy. 2 mics. Pop signal when visual. 2 minutes was a lifetime. 2 minutes was also hope. The attachment provided insurance. Final shots that weren't dramatic, just necessary. An RPG tube lifted again. She cut it down. A rifleman rose to sprint toward the gully mouth. She dropped him before he could close. The lower drone dipped closer, searching, hungry. She didn't fight it directly. She slid one more time, pressed herself into the grass seam, let snow blow over her like a curtain. The drone hovered where she'd been, found nothing, and drifted away to chase louder movement. Down in the gully, the SEALs moved like men who knew they were still in danger, but refused to die quietly. The heavy gunner's weapon was hot enough to steam despite the cold. His magazines were light. His jaw was clenched. The medic's gloves were stiff, but his hands didn't stop. They reached the bend, a place where the gully widened, where a stand of wind-twisted scrub broke the line of sight from the ridge. The world there felt oddly calm compared to the basin. The wind still hissed. The snow still glared, but the bullets were farther away. A thump echoed in the distance, rotors coming fast. The chief popped a signal smoke anyway, not for concealment, but for confirmation, letting it bloom briefly in the scrub before wind tore it apart. The helicopter appeared low and hard, skimming the terrain, not hovering in the kill zone, just sliding in like a hand snatching something precious. The crew chief's door gun scanned the ridge with controlled menace. "Move!" Someone yelled over the rotor wash. They loaded the wounded man first, then the comms tech, then the breacher, then the medic. The heavy gunner backed in last, firing a final burst toward the ridge not because it would kill anyone, but because it would make heads duck. The chief climbed, turned, eyes searching the snowfield, the ridge, the grass seam. He saw nothing. No figure running. No Overwatch silhouette. No friendly waving. Just a pale patch of dead grass pushing through snow, wind flattening it, making it look like nothing. The helicopter lifted, banking away as rounds chased it from far behind, angry but late. Only when the basin shrank beneath them did the chief's shoulders sag, a fraction. Only then did the men allow themselves to breathe like they weren't holding the world together with teeth. Back at the staging hut, warmth felt almost obscene. It made the blood on fabric darker. It made fingers sting as they thawed. It made pain arrive late. They sat on benches, helmets off, faces raw from wind and adrenaline, eyes too bright. The medic checked the wounded man again, quiet, methodical. The comms tech placed the stolen module on the table like it might explode. Higher command crowded in. Officers with clean gear and clipped voices, intelligence personnel with laptops and tired eyes. The debrief started blunt, because pretending would have been insulting. "That wasn't a chance contact," an officer said. "That was staged." The chief nodded, jaw tight. They built a kill box. 2 ridges, mid-slope control. Drone spotting. Comms jammed. The comms tech leaned forward. It was a jammer, not terrain. When it went down, our radios flickered. "You're sure it went down?" the officer asked. The chief's eyes went to the corner of the hut where the attachment stood, half in shadow, rifle case slung, posture relaxed like she'd never been under pressure. He hadn't seen her return. He hadn't heard her come in. She'd just been there when they landed, like she'd grown out of the snow itself. "We're sure," the chief said. The intelligence officer slid the recovered module into a reader. Lines of data spilled onto the screen, logs, keys, handshake records. The room's temperature seemed to drop as the meaning settled. "This module," the intelligence officer said slowly, held access keys to the sensor network. "Not just this site, the whole chain. Patrol timing, response windows. It's a map of our habits." The heavy gunner let out a low whistle. "So they could predict us." "They were already predicting you," the officer said. This was about confirming and expanding. And he paused, eyes lifting to the team. "Propaganda. Live capture. Proof they can take you in daylight." The breacher's hands curled into fists. They weren't trying to wipe us. They were trying to bag us. The chief exhaled through his nose, anger sharpening into something colder. They almost did. Silence settled. Not the silence of peace. The silence of looking at how thin the line had been. The officer turned a page in his notebook. "Who took the jammer?" The chief's gaze flicked to the attachment again. She met his eyes for a moment, then looked away, as if she'd rather stare at the plywood wall than accept a spotlight. The chief cleared his throat. "Our Overwatch." The officer frowned. "We didn't assign Overwatch on this op." The comms tech blinked. "Yes, you did. She was attached." The officer flipped through pages, confused. Attachment. Observer. The medic's voice was quiet. "She saved us." The officer looked up, startled by the bluntness. "From where?" The attachment finally spoke, just enough to answer without offering a story. "Low pocket. Grass seam." The breacher's mouth twisted, remembering his joke. He didn't laugh now. "You were down there? In the dead grass?" She nodded once. "How did your shot sound like that?" the heavy gunner asked, leaning forward. Like they didn't echo. "Wind," she said. "Angle. Rock behind. Snow in front. Don't fire when the basin is listening." The explanation was simple, and because it was simple it felt like a rebuke. Nothing mystical. Nothing supernatural. Just a person who paid attention to what everyone else ignored. The chief leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You warned me about the funnel. I said valleys become funnels, she replied. I ignored it, he admitted, the words tasting bitter. I thought it was. I don't know what I thought. The attachment's expression didn't change. Everyone wants the high ridge. High feels safe. High is obvious. The officer scribbled notes. Trying to catch up? Those tracks you mentioned on approach. Unnatural lines, she said. Packed. Straight. Too many. Not animals. The comms tech swallowed. You saw it coming. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just said, I saw pieces. The medic flexed his fingers, wincing as circulation returned. Why didn't you tell us more? I did, she said softly. I don't talk loud. People don't listen to quiet. The room went still. The truth of it sat on the table like the stolen module. Ugly, undeniable. The heavy gunner shifted, uncomfortable. We made jokes. The attachment's eyes flicked toward him, not accusing, not forgiving. Just observing. Jokes don't stop bullets. The chief stared at his hands, then looked up. Why do you stay quiet? He asked, and the question surprised even him. It felt too personal for a debrief. But something in that basin, something about invisible help, had made the question unavoidable. For the first time, the attachment hesitated. Not long, just long enough for everyone to see that behind the calm there was something heavier. I was loud once, she said finally. Not with words. With my name. With wanting credit. It didn't help anyone. It just made the next mistake bigger. The officer's pen paused. What mistake? The attachment's gaze went distant, out through the hut wall into snow and glare that wasn't here. A bad call. Years ago. Someone else paid for it. After that, I learned invisible is safer. For everyone. No one pressed. Not because they weren't curious, but because pressing felt like grabbing a scar. The chief nodded slowly. Still, he said, voice rough, you earned a seat at this table. The attachment looked at the table like it was a foreign object. Then she nodded once, small. The medic, still kneeling beside the wounded man's stretcher, lifted his chin in a gesture that wasn't official but carried the weight of one. The breacher followed suit, then the heavy gunner. Not a salute, not exactly. Something older. Acknowledgement. Outside, the wind continued its constant argument with the valley. The debrief wound down. The officers and intel personnel filed out, leaving behind the men who'd been in the bowl and the woman who'd been in the grass. The chief stood, shouldering his jacket. You coming? He asked, not like an order, not like a request, but like an invitation into something that had previously been closed. The attachment didn't answer right away. Then she said, I'll be outside. The chief nodded and stepped away, giving her space. The others busied themselves with gear and checks, and the kind of quiet after-action rituals that kept the mind from replaying the worst moments too loudly. The attachment slipped out of the hut without a sound. Daylight, snow hit her like a wall. Bright, clean, honest in a way cold could be, no pretending. She walked a few steps away from the hut until the noise inside dulled, until the only sound was wind and the distant rotor wash of a helicopter leaving without them. Near the hut's edge, where the wind had stripped snow thin, a patch of dead grass poked through, pale and flattened, stubborn enough to exist where white tried to erase everything. She knelt beside it, gloved fingers brushing the blades as if checking their direction, their texture, their truth. The grass bent under her touch and sprang back slowly, resilient in its own quiet way. Behind her, the chief opened the hut door and looked out. He saw her there in the snow, small against the bright world, and he understood something he hadn't in the basin. Rescue didn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrived like silence. Sometimes the person who saved you didn't want applause. Sometimes she didn't even want to be seen. The wind gusted, blowing a fine veil of powder across the ground. For a moment, it blurred edges, softened shapes, made everything look like it could vanish. When the gust passed, the patch of grass remained. The spot where she'd knelt was empty. The chief stood in the doorway for a long moment, blinking against glare, half expecting to see movement, a figure walking away, a shadow slipping behind scrub. Nothing, just snow, bright and indifferent, and dead grass poking through like a secret that refused to die. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, letting the cold air fill his lungs. The words that rose in his mind weren't dramatic. They weren't a speech. They were a simple, hard truth, an echo that would stick with him longer than the sound of gunfire. The most dangerous thing in that valley hadn't been the ridge guns or the drone. It had been the moment he'd dismissed a quiet warning. And the only reason he was breathing now was because someone quiet had done the work anyway. He stepped out into the snow, letting the doors shut behind him, and followed the wind. Not to find her, not to drag her into the light, but to learn how to see what he'd been trained to overlook. Because in a white world that tried to erase everything, the things that survived were often the ones that didn't announce themselves. And somewhere out there, in dead grass and sun glare, the phantom was already gone, belonging to the mission more than to any room, any table, any story told later. The basin would remember her in silence. So would they.